that safe, decent, affordable housing is fundamental to a family forging a path out of poverty, and that decent and affordable shelter is intricately woven into better communities for children and their parents. I do want to take a moment to thank Amy Albert again from the University of Rhode Island Center for Career and Experiential Education. Amy is the community engagement coordinator, and she's right now behind the scenes with us being the technology guru. And I am extremely grateful because I don't think I will ever figure out Zoom, WebEx, whatever the platform is. I'm still learning it. So Amy, thank you so much for being here. And for the last 20 years, Habitat for Humanity in South County and URI have partnered together, and it's a partnership that enriches both organizations. So we are helping overcome the burdens of substandard housing here in our community, and we do that by working with students, faculty, and staff to not only mobilize volunteers, but also gather resources to build homes and hope here in South County. So again, thank you to the University of Rhode Island, the student chapter, as well as the Center for Career and Experiential Education for supporting our mission and helping us put this event together today. So why are we here? Well, on March 2nd, mark your calendars, write it down, put it in your computer, put it wherever you want. March 2nd, big things are happening, and that is the opportunity for Rhode Islanders to vote on 7 bond questions, including question 3, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. This is the Housing and Community Opportunity Bond. So this is a $65 million bond that's going to be used to increase the availability of affordable housing and support community revitalization. And we're going to dive into the nitty-gritty details of what that exactly means. Now, if you're interested in learning about the other 6 bond issues, you can visit the Secretary of State website at vote.sos.ri.gov. We'll put that in the chat, as well as there is this beautiful voter referenda handbook that I'm also going to put in the chat that just paints a perfect picture of what to expect with these 7 bond questions. So I am going to enter that into the chat right now for you to look at. And it's also on our website. If you go to southcountyhabitat.org/advocacy, we have it under our resources tab. Highly encourage that you take a look at that before the March 2nd election. So today we are joined by amazing humans, leaders in our community, they're housing advocates and experts, to talk about the history of housing and advocacy in Rhode Island, and also to elaborate on this housing bond issue. I am so excited to hear from everyone. There's some folks I've worked with before, others who I haven't, so I'm just really excited to hear what you all have to say. And so before we dive into our questions, I just want to call on each panelist we have here to introduce themselves and just briefly explain to our listeners who you are and what type of good work you're doing in our community. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it off to Kim.
Thank you, Alicia. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to South Habitat for hosting us today. It's really an honor to be on a panel with everyone that's here today. So thank you. My name is Kim Ahern, and I am Governor Raimondo's deputy counsel. And so in that role, I describe myself as half a lawyer and half a policy person. And so on the policy side, some of the policy areas that I work with the governor on are criminal justice, juvenile justice, and most important for this panel, housing policy in Rhode Island. And as part of that, I get to work closely with the state agencies that play a role in housing policy, and that includes the Executive Office of Commerce, the Office of Housing and Community Development, and also Rhode Island Housing, as well as all the community organizations and nonprofits and key stakeholders like that are on this call today that play an important and vital role in that too. And so I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Kim. Next, I'm going to ask Sharon.
Good morning, and thank you. I'm so pleased to be able to participate today. By way of introduction, I was the executive director at West Stonewood Housing for a number of years until last year. Currently, I serve on 2 statewide boards and work with several younger professionals as a mentor and coach, and I'm active with my church. I also support some organizational and real estate development work for a small nonprofit agency in New York. Other than that, taking it easy for these days. West Stonewood Housing is a CDC. It's located in Providence, but takes a holistic approach to community development. and offers programs in financial literacy, home buyer education. We make home repair loans and more. The real estate development scope ranges from new construction infill housing to foreclosure recapture, mod and gut rehabs, to large-scale rental and mixed-use projects. During my tenure, $122 million was invested in real estate and community development work. Over 100 new homeowners were created. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Sharon. Next, Christina.
Hello, buenos dias, everyone. My name is Christina Contreras. My pronouns are she, her, and ella. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless. So, Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless is a dynamic coalition committed to ensuring that no Rhode Islander experiences homelessness. And we work collaboratively to create and advance lasting solutions that prevent and end homelessness in Rhode Island. Now, that's a lot, especially in the midst of this pandemic. The coalition wears a lot of hats and does a lot within the system. So we're the state lead for the Homeless Management Information System. We also run the Coordinated Entry Line, which is the statewide hotline. If someone you know is experiencing homelessness or is about to, you can call Coordinated Entry to be connected into shelter. And I can share the number with you, Aisha. It's something that's important for everybody to know, right? We also do a lot of work with policy and advocacy because we know that in order for us to prevent and end homelessness in Rhode Island, we need fundamental systemic change. And that can only happen with policy. Excuse me. Some of the other things that we do include working with constituents to get feedback about what needs to be done in the state to end and prevent homelessness, because no one understands the flaws in a policy or what needs to change or what people need to be helped or how to help folks better than people who have lived it. And so I'm really excited that my colleague Wendy Thomas is on here. Wendy is a speaker with Voices of Homelessness. And we do a lot of work together policy-wise to make sure that we're connecting people with lived expertise on these issues with folks who are creating policy, because otherwise policy gets made in an echo chamber or in a vacuum rather, and we end up with something that doesn't really work. And that's particularly true when it comes to housing policy. With this bond here, the coalition is incredibly supportive of it because we need resources to build more homes. Housing ends homelessness, and Rhode Island does not simply have enough. So we advocate, we push for these solutions because we know that's what we need. So I think that's everything, but I'm really excited to be here with y'all.
Thank you, Christina. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Brenda.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. I'm happy to be here. I'm Brenda Clement, and I'm director of Housing Works Rhode Island, which is housed at Roger Williams University at the Providence campus. And we're a research and policy organization that looks at all things housing, trying to show the connectedness between housing and economic growth and educational attainment and achievement and health outcomes. We publish a number of reports and information to make the case, if you will, as to why more housing investment in Rhode Island makes sense. Our vision as an organization, and I know it's one that we share with many of our, with pretty much all of our partners, I think, on the call, is that we envision that all Rhode Island communities will embrace a variety of housing choices so that residents, regardless of income or race or ethnic background, can live in healthy, quality homes in vibrant and thriving neighborhoods. And that, in my view, should be the goal that we all strive towards. So thanks again, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Brenda. And I'd like to introduce our next and final panelist, Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Thomas. I'm part of Voices of the Homeless. Formerly homeless. I've been housed 3.5 years And before the pandemic started, I was doing major volunteer work in the homeless community.
Thank you, Wendy. And I did want to highlight chat if you are tuning in from WebEx. Erin put in the phone number for the coordinated entry system for those who are seeking shelter. That phone number is area code 401-277-4316. Just wanted to put that out there before we get it. So thank you, everyone who is here joining us today. Just to give everyone an idea of how the program is going to flow, we have a variety of prepared questions for our panel today. Again, we're speaking specifically for question 3, the Housing and Community Opportunity Bond, which will be up for vote in the March 2nd election. So if there's anything you take home from this today, March 2nd, special election, and they're talking about question 3. So we're also going to provide the opportunity for audience to ask questions. So please utilize, like Amy said, that chat feature. If you do have questions or any points you want to make, we definitely want to make sure we try and get to everyone. If we cannot get to everyone, we will do a post-event email blast to those who are registered today and get those answers to those questions if we can't touch upon them. We also have, so we have the chat feature and the Q&A feature on our WebEx platform. So please try and use the Q&A feature for questions, but also use the chat feature to introduce yourself, attendees. You know, who are you? What organization or school or business are you representing? We love to get an idea of who's tuning in with us today. And with that being said, we're going to kick off our event. So my first question right now is for Wendy. So as Christina mentioned in her introduction, no one understands homelessness and housing insecurity better than those who have lived through it themselves. So Wendy, can you share with us a bit about your experience and ways that you believe are going to increase awareness while building the political will that we need to get things done?
Yeah, my bout with my first bout with homelessness started about 20 years ago. We had a fire and lost absolutely everything we owned. Got into a shelter, got settled into another apartment, and 5 years later had another fire and lost everything. But it shouldn't take that long for people to get housing. It took me almost 17 years, only because of a lot because of bad choices with rooming up with other people instead of waiting it out to get a place on my own. But we don't have enough housing. It's greatly needed, whether it be people in the homeless sector, whether it be people that are paying over 50% of their income for housing, or whether it be people like me who just want to improve their housing situation.
Thank you, Wendy. Next, I want to go back to Christina. This question is for you. So we know that, you know, working in the housing industry and in nonprofit work, that there have been significant impacts from this COVID-19 pandemic, and its economic fallout is still unfolding, and there are numbers of families, even more than ever, who are continuing to struggle to make ends meet. And we know advocacy for policy and systems change can help ensure that more families can find appropriate, quality, affordable housing. So in your work, Christina, can you talk a little bit about the history of affordable housing advocacy efforts here in Rhode Island, and what legislative solutions can the General Assembly support or can introduce to ensure that we're meeting the housing needs of renters, homeowners, and landlords? Christina, you're on mute.
It's testing now. So first I want to say that there is a long and incredible history and legacy in Rhode Island and Providence in particular of housing advocacy around things like redlining, access to housing, legalized discrimination in housing, etc. And that has been sorely needed for such a long time. Because it's really important to understand that where we are right now, we didn't get here overnight. The pandemic is not a great equalizer. It's been a great exacerbator, and it's held a mirror up to us as a state and made us realize exactly where we haven't been investing the way we should. And that's housing in a huge way. So for years and years and years, we have lagged behind our neighbors in terms of funding for construction, building homes, excuse me, maintaining the housing stock that we have, which is literally the oldest in the country, and repairing, building, maintaining, etc. We don't do that. Every single state around us has a dedicated line item in their budget for housing construction. We don't. Thankfully, Governor Raimondo last year put in her budget $8 million for such a line item. I know that piece of legislation is going to be taken up again by the General Assembly this year, and that is something that's absolutely critical. Because as Wendy was saying, we don't have enough housing, and it's forcing, I mean, you can't make $1 out of 15 cents, right? Right now in Rhode Island, for extremely low-income households, for every 100 of them, there are 37 affordable and available apartments. We're not building enough. We need to make up for lost time. We should have passed this like years ago, right? But it's so critical for us to make sure we have these investments in our state. So that's another reason why the bond is so important. I mean, the bond is not something that is going to be a silver bullet here, but if we don't, we're treading water with a bond. If we don't pass this, we will drown. We need these consistent, reliable investments in housing construction so that there's adequate supply to meet the need. And if we don't do that, it gets worse every year. Same way, if you don't fix the potholes in your roads are going to get worse every single year. This situation is just going to continue to get worse. Other things that are critically important here is one of the root causes of homelessness is racism, and systemic racism especially. And there are still to this day so many barriers of discrimination that continue to persist, such as discrimination based on source of income. So you have folks who have money to pay for an apartment, but a landlord can say, "No, I don't like where your money comes from. Yeah, it's legal and you can afford this, but I don't like where it comes from, so I'm not going to rent to you." And since we don't have enough housing supply doesn't meet the needs of our folks, that means that people have fewer and fewer options when they get a rejection like that. And that means especially for people who are making less than $50,000, because Brenda, I think that's nowhere in the state can you rent an apartment if you're making less than 50K. I mean, the cost burden is just insane. And that also goes back to lack of supply. But excuse me, for those folks, I mean, the only choices that they have for housing are places that are increasingly just falling apart, right? Like lead doors that don't lock, terrible mice, I mean, just you see this like dilapidated housing. That's the only thing that people can afford. And I mean, that's not any place to live. Housing is a human right, but even more so, a safe, healthy, affordable home is a human right. It's not just, okay, you got a roof over your head and you got 4 walls and you're fine. You need more than that, and people deserve better than that. It's not just, and even though pretty much all construction that's happening now, literally, it's luxury construction practically, but you should have a safe place to live that's affordable if you're not making like bananas dollars, right? Buku bucks person, one gal's opinion, right? But that's why these these policy proposals that get at the heart of these fundamental issues are so important, and investing in housing construction and creating more safe, secure, affordable housing is really that is how we end homelessness in Rhode Island.
Thank you, Christina. And going off of that, there is coalition work around housing policies that a lot of organizations are looking to see come to life in the General Assembly. So the Homes Rhode Island Network is a fabulous resource to learn more about those advocacy efforts. I'm just going to go ahead in the chat and put their website. I highly encourage that you check that out. And with that being said, I'm going to next ask this question for Kim. So Kim, We have these 7 questions coming up March 2nd. I'm going to keep saying that date so folks know. And that's a total of $400 million in bonds to go before voters. So again, today we're focusing on this housing and community opportunity bond. So my question for you is, can you just talk a little bit about how bonds work and how they're used for folks on this call who maybe don't really understand bonds? And then can you more specifically dive into the details of the housing and community opportunity bond and how that will be used?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Alicia. I guess as just to take a step back and zoom out, if we go back to before COVID struck the state, the mechanism by which bonds actually happen in the state is through the governor introducing it in her budget and then the General Assembly taking it up and then deciding whether or not those are proposals we should put before the voters. And that's kind of the procedural way in which bonds happen. And so if we go back in time just a little to January of 2020, which although only a year ago, I think for many seems like a lifetime ago. And if we go back in time and look back at what the governor had introduced in her FY21 budget, it did include a housing bond, but it was much smaller than what we're talking about today. I think approximately 20 or 25 million. And so flash forward 2 weeks later, we all know what happened in March of 2020, and that's where COVID really struck Rhode Island hard and the whole country and world. And so what COVID highlighted and what Christina really articulated very well just now were the inequities that existed before COVID, certainly, but that really stood out in really shocking ways because of the pandemic, right? And I really think that it stood out in no more clear way than in housing, because we know that to be safe from COVID-19 and to be safe from this pandemic, that you need a safe place to be able to quarantine, to be able to isolate, to be able to stay if you do have this disease or if you need to quarantine. And so the lack of a safe and affordable house became all more clear as a result of COVID-19. And so zooming back in with that little bit of background, what happened last summer was that Governor Raimondo expanded on her bond that she had previously introduced in that January budget. And she expanded on that vision to really rebuild a stronger Rhode Island after the COVID-19 pandemic. And she announced, the increases that we've already gone over, which are like the 7 questions that we'll have to vote on in March. And I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the only reason we were able to do that was because the General Treasurer, Seth Magaziner, released guidance showing that the state has additional capacity to be able to bond for more dollars. And we're doing that to really spur economic stimulus. And so bonds are usually like a tool that we use to stimulate the economy and really provide an immediate infusion of cash into the economy. And we know that that's needed right now more than ever to help with our COVID-19 relief efforts. And so by borrowing now using this bond while interest rates are super low, we know that Rhode Island can make these investments in housing and promote economic recovery, community resiliency, and equity across the state. And so I personally am, thankful for the governor, for the treasurer, for the General Assembly for passing this and getting it out to all of us. And so I know a big part of this panel is about those efforts. And so it's really on us now to make sure that we vote for this and get out the vote. And to answer the second part of your question about where do we envision this being used for? I think the most obvious one is what we've already talked about, which is expanding affordable housing, which is lacking in Rhode Island. And we know that a safe and affordable place to call home is really the American dream, and that it's one that's unfortunately out of reach for too many Rhode Islanders. We know across our state that, as I think Christina mentioned, that the cost of housing is rising faster than incomes. That leaves workers and families and seniors and veterans and a whole host of folks struggling to find a home or an apartment that they can afford. And so what we are hoping that by investing in this bond, that we're investing in housing opportunities for all Rhode Islanders and that we can help with the housing shortage that's already been described. This bond is exciting because not only will it create construction and rehabilitation of affordable homes, but it's also going to be used to help communities revitalize neighborhoods through development, through new construction, through property acquisition, by leveraging the millions that are part of this in additional resources to create more housing, to create well-paying jobs, construction jobs, and to create stronger communities. And so, I think that it's not just homes, it's also jobs. Like, we know that by voting on this, that we will create those jobs to help folks build. And so I think that this bond is going to do a lot of good for not just housing, but also for jobs and for the community. And in particular around the community revitalization, because I do think that that's where this bond varies from prior bonds that we've had that are housing. I think that that's really, really needed right now, because the coronavirus has really tested the resiliency of so many of our communities. And we know, that for our state's response, that for all that we've done in the COVID response, this virus has highlighted that there's pre-existing disparities in residents' access to resources. And we know that we've seen that in particular in our high density communities, and that communities will benefit from investments in community infrastructure, such as like mixed use hubs, public meeting spaces. These are just some examples of some projects that could be leveraged with this funding. And we hope that obviously that Rhode Island votes for it, and that we can get this on the streets very quickly to help those communities that are. Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I could definitely attest to this bond funding being crucial. We'll talk about how it impacts CDCs and community development corporations like Habitat for Humanity in just a moment. But I do want to take a look at our questions. It looks like we do have one in the chat here. And this is, I'm going to open this to the panel, and whomever can answer it, please go right ahead. So this question is asking specifically, are there any plans to help address at-risk families, specifically those who are not considered homeless by HUD, but do find themselves, couch surfing or co-dwelling with other relatives or friends or families? So does anyone on this call have a response to that question? If not, we can most certainly look into that.
I first have a clarifying question. Is this being asked how the bonds will accomplish that, or is this like a larger question, broader question rather?
Let's see if Erin has a response to that. From my understanding, it looks like it's in general, but I don't know if you could answer to either.
So I'm happy to jump in to talk a little bit about how past bonds have targeted folks most at need, and that may get at your question a little bit as well too. So as voters may recall that have been around, like me, have been around for a while, this will actually be the 4th time that we've asked voters to support housing and housing investments in the state. The previous housing bonds, we released a report in partnership with Rhode Island Housing earlier this summer, and the past 3 bonds have created more than 3,200 new or preserved long-term affordable homes. Most of those, that funding and money, while we did serve incomes across a range of 30% up to 120% for homeownership homes, most of the money and most of the units that were created, actually close to 2,600 of the units targeted people at 60% of median income or below, and a substantial portion of those targeted people at 30% of median or below. So the funding and money has been administered through the Housing Resource Commission in partnership with Rhode Island Housing. And I think the sentiment of folks on HRC like me and others is that we need to target these still scarce resources, even though it sounds like a lot of money, to those most in need. So yes, in my head, couch surfing and doubling up and overcrowdedness and all these other issues are things that we want to target first in these bonds.
Thank you, Brenda. And also another question is, what do we mean when we talk about community revitalization?
I can jump in for a moment. From a CDC perspective, community revitalization can change community to community, because one of the things we do as CDCs is we work with people that live in those communities. So for instance, one of my colleagues has brought a daycare into the site because there was a need in that community. For us at West Elmwood, we implemented some programs using urban agriculture because there was evidence that people were coming to this country well rather, and getting sick. And we also had a food desert in our community. So, it depends on the community what's needed, but it's also talking about that we leverage other monies. And so with a small piece of money from the bond, we can then leverage other monies. For instance, we did a community room and we put a kitchen in, and we were able to get over $100,000 from another source because we had some money in the bond that was going toward housing and working with people in that immediate area. So it's not just what the bonds will go for, but what it will leverage and bring to the city and the state.
Thank
That
you.
helps.
Excellent. So my next question is for you, Sharon. And I also come from, Habitat for Humanity. We're considered a community development corporation. We understand how important this funding is. It's could be known to the public if you've ever heard of the Building Homes Rhode Island program. That's essentially what we're talking about here. And it has helped fund the construction of homes that we've built here in South County. And backtracking to what I said earlier, we've served over 100 families. That includes 99 adults and 150 children. And we're just this one pocket of an organization trying to serve South County. So you can imagine, multiply that by all the CDCs in community development corporations in the state, we're having a tremendous impact because of this funding. So Sharon, can you explain, in your experience, the impact the bond has on your organization? You talked a little bit about the revitalization, but as far as allowing organizations to be able to serve more, how does it impact organizations such as West Elmwood?
Great. So there are direct and indirect values that I recognize from those housing bonds. All kinds of housing have been created throughout our state. Just one $50 million bond generated $800 million in economic activity. Using the previous bonds, CDCs and not-for-profits have created low-income housing and affordable housing as land trusts, rentals, and home ownership for the workforce, special needs, veterans, homeless, seniors, and the working poor. The bond investment is typically not the only source of money in the project. For West Elmwood, one of our projects by itself, we were able to attract national funds from CDFIs, intermediaries, the Federal Home Loan Bank, and federal and local private and public monies. This money has come in as grants, as loans, and as equity. One project alone can have as many as 10 other sources combining with the bond money to make a project feasible. So whether the bond money is the first in as a lead in the project that says we believe in this project, go get more money, or whether it's the last money that we apply for as a gap filler, it has been key to making projects work financially and to allow us to rent or sell affordably. And like we just said, it also leverages dollars around programs and programming, or in some cases, infrastructure like monies for sidewalks, tree planting, where the low tree canopy coverage, increasing the trees in the neighborhood is a key part of public health. So there's a lot of direct, but there's also indirect value to the bonds, to such things as lead and environmental remediation. Small construction companies have progressed to take on bigger jobs and hiring more local people. Infrastructure investments have been made, like those I just mentioned. Through these developments, CDCs have hired accountants, attorneys, architects, environmental and other engineers, landscapers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians. So there's this secondary value that we are adding to the economic engines in our neighborhood and in the state, and contributing by using other national monies at an investment level to engage professionals at a local level. In addition to that, the tax bases have increased. The bond money has been key to several of the other funding becoming available. Excuse me.
Thank you, Sharon. We've touched upon the economic impact, and actually, one of my favorite quotes that I always share is from Brenda, where she says, "The path to economic opportunity starts at your front door." And that just is paints such a clear message and picture for folks who are trying to understand the significance of this bond. So we talked about it a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else, Brenda, you wanted to add about explaining that economic impact. If we pass these bonds, how will it stimulate our economy? And we talked about how Rhode Island is lacking compared to our neighboring states. So can you just talk a little bit more about Rhode Island and how we compare, as well as how many more affordable units do we need to meet this need?
Sure. Sure. Thank you. Just to add on a little bit to Sharon's comments too about investment and looking at again at past bonds, the last 3 bonds, they have helped leverage over $65 million in additional investments from other public and private sources. And so obviously that's a big shot in the arm, if you will, as we're all thinking about shots in the arm lately to our local economy. And obviously a new bond, a new funding source would continue to do that. Those bonds also created 4,000 jobs through construction activity. But as Sharon points out, it's even more long-standing than that, because not only do you build the units, but you also have to maintain them. And so there's people who continue to manage the properties and to keep up the properties and so forth. So there's some longer-term jobs and benefits that arise as well too from it. As you pointed out, we, unlike other states in New England, we are dead last in terms of our investment per capita in housing compared to our neighbors in Massachusetts and Connecticut, who spend far more than we do, but even Maine beats us in terms of investment in housing in Rhode Island. And so we've got a lot of catch-up work to do, as Christina noted earlier. Not only are housing bonds critical, but we also know that kind of an ongoing dedicated stream of funding and money. We're very grateful that voters have chosen to invest in housing. But steady, dependable funding and resources is really what we need to continue to chip away at this problem as well too. And so a dedicated funding stream, as the governor proposed in her original budget, also needs to go hand in hand in the work. So and just to quote another housing colleague, the chair of Rhode Island Housing's board, and I'm pretty sure we have Carol Ventura and other folks from Rhode Island Housing listening in today, but her board chair, Nick Ratsinas, talks all the time that homes are where jobs go to sleep at night. And so it's workers that benefit and people who are trying to recover and get themselves back into job training and jobs as our economy recovers. Every single one of those workers needs a safe and decent place to lay their head at night too. And investments like bonds and finally getting a dedicated funding stream are the way for us to start to address this issue.
Alicia, can I jump back in for a moment?
Absolutely.
You know, there's another point I'd like to make, and that's the consequence of not having a bond approved in March. Every housing need that has been mentioned still exists. And with the pandemic, even more working and low-wage families will need affordable options. For the last several years, the industry itself has suffered from federal cutbacks. With fewer dollars available to create that safe, decent housing of any type, the bond's availability will help us to create the units that truly meet the needs of the aspects of our community. And I think it's not just about what it does do, but what could happen if we don't have it, but I just wanted to share my thought on that.
That's great. Yeah, we talk often about, you know, can we afford to do this? Well, can we afford not to with the long-term impacts that we're seeing? And I think that's the conversation we need to have. Before we jump into the next question, Kim, I know you have a little bit more you wanted to talk about coming back to the community revitalization question. So I just want to give you an opportunity to speak upon that.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. I wanted to add, when we had that specific question to the community revitalization piece, that we have some examples in the past of how this has been successful. And in the prior iterations of our bonds, there was one in particular called the Acquisition and Revitalization Program, the ARP, that was really for blight remediation and urban revitalization. And that was administered and allocated by our partners in Rhode Island Housing. And we're so thankful for what they did with that. But one example that they highlight that I really think stands out to me in terms of like what we could do with this future bond is the Rhode Island College Workforce Development Hub that opened in Central Falls shortly before COVID struck, actually, earlier in 2020. And this is like a very unique hub where we're doing a lot of really great things at it, including it's an opportunity for partners to build multilingual, health-centered workforce. It provides job training, career and college opportunities in like high demand areas for the residents that are located near and in a traditionally underserved urban center. It also helps our adult education and workforce with initiatives and programming through the Office of Post-Secondary Commissioner. And it really just opens up a number of opportunities, not just for Rhode Island College, but also for the state as a whole. For example, our Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative is based there as well. And so this is just an example of what's been done in the past that I think, when this bond passes, that we'll be able to use the community revitalization for. And we're certainly hopeful that we will work with state agencies like Rhode Island Commerce, like the Department of Health, like the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, to support CDCs and cities and towns and private developers that would be focused on prioritizing recovery-oriented projects in communities that are hardest hit by COVID-19. And we can look to our partners, the health equity zones that our Department of Health has been so successful with as a model for that. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you, Kim. And I do see, please keep utilizing that Q&A feature if you do have questions. I have a couple more questions for the panel I'd like to ask, and then we'll definitely take a look at those audience questions. So thank you for that. Please utilize that feature. This next question is going back to both Brenda and Sharon. So Housing Works Rhode Island publishes each year a housing facts book that goes into great detail about the housing needs in Rhode Island and how each town is or is not meeting those needs. And also that fact book can help inform policy, but also inform us as far as, where do we stand? So right now, only 6 of Rhode Island's 39 communities meet the Rhode Island state law, having 10% of housing stock be affordable. And I think right now, Rhode Island needs over 12,000 units of affordable housing just to hit that 10% minimum goal statewide. So this question is for Brenda and Sharon and others. If you feel that you can contribute, please do. But can you just elaborate on this 10% state law first, for those, again, who may not even be aware that this is a law? And is 10% even enough?
So I'll start, and I'm sure Sharon may want to jump in as well too. The act is called the Low to Moderate Income Housing Act. It's been on the books for well over 20 plus years. And as you said, we're asked, communities under the act are urged to get to at least 10% of their housing stock as affordable as defined under the law. It's generally 80% of median income or below units, and some exceptions around homeownership units as well too. So you're right that even if every community in Rhode Island got to 10% of their goal, we still would likely have a shortage of units. So we still have more work to do. But, as for most things, you need a goal, right? You need something to work towards. And so that was the attempt. The other attempt is that it's also a fair share law, that every community kind of needs to step up and lean in a little bit more and try to increase the supply of housing, because every community in our state has low-income workers, has seniors who want to try to age in place, have folks who work in their schools or in their assisted living facilities or retail stores. Everybody's got a Dunkin' Donuts somewhere near them, right? Which means that there are lower income workers who need a safe and decent place. So in our fact book that you refer to, even pre-pandemic, more than 146,000 Rhode Island households, or nearly 37% of Rhode Islanders, are housing cost burden, or spending more than 30% of their income towards housing. And when you're spending more than that 30% for housing at the higher income level, you have to everybody has to make choices. If you're spending too much money and more than you had allocated in your budget towards a certain expense. But at the higher income, it may mean that you reduce savings, or you don't go on a vacation, or you defer some sort of major expense. At the lower income level, those choices become much more dire. You're late on rent, you face eviction, You have to go to a food pantry to supplement your food supply for your family. You don't fulfill a prescription because you don't have the choices. So don't have the funding and money. So we know that it's a challenge. It's been a challenge for a long period of time, as our fact book regularly points out. For the past 15 plus years, it's been a persistent problem in Rhode Island. And until and unless we finally address it, we are not going to be able to continue to grow economically. And I worried about how we'll recover, that it will be a very uneven recovery if we don't start to address housing needs as well.
Brenda's absolutely right. We're already uneven and it's already unbalanced. We need, the need for housing includes all of our neighbors, whether they're veterans, homeless, victims of domestic violence. If they're in the workforce, there's need for supportive housing. We need affordable rentals and we need affordable home ownership so that entry-level professionals and young families can achieve their dreams of ownership. We need senior housing programs for people not just aging in place, but they need housing options for assisted living and for, over 55 communities. There are a lot of needs and it's not concentrated to one section of the city or one group within our population.
Can I just add on Sharon's point around kind of fairness and access? Right now, Rhode Island's Black and Latino homeownership rates are far below the white homeownership rate. The white homeownership rate is about 67%. Black and Latino homeownership rates are 33% and 29%. And we've got a lot of catch up to do. For most of us, owning a home or being a homeowner is the way that you create some wealth and stability for your family. And generations of our Black and Hispanic neighbors have been cut out of that opportunity.
And Alicia, to follow up on the connection between the 10% goal and the 10% law and the bond, I wanted to first just thank Brenda and her team for just the wealth of knowledge they bring to us. And in particular, this past summer, they released a status report in perfect timing in July of 2020 that reviewed not only reviewed our bonds, but really helped set the stage for what we're doing now. Mm-hmm. I think that report highlighted that BHRI, the Building Homes RI program, developed units in over 34 cities and towns, and that 40% of those units are located in communities that have not reached their 10% affordable housing goals, so nearly half. I think that that's important to point out because it shows that the bond can actually help address the problem that you are rightfully pointing out.
I agree about the housing, so thank you, Brenda.
Yeah, thank you. And here at South County Habitat, we're focused on homeownership and building affordable homeownership units across Washington County. And there's other community development corporations and nonprofits working across the state to build in every town in Rhode Island so that those opportunities are available, and also allow that economic stimulation as close to jobs and transportation and all that good stuff. And so when we're looking at this statewide bond, if this bond does pass, and this might be a question for Kim, but again, Sharon, Brenda, and whomever could contribute to it, how can we ensure that the bond funds are going to be used equitably across Rhode Island to serve all communities in need?
No, it's a great question. And I think we have to rely in some part on what we've done in the past, but know that really with every program that has come out recently, any government initiative that I've been a part of or policy, my number one question is, we need to look at this through a COVID lens, right? We need to take what we've been doing in the past and really ask what needs to be changed or updated because of this pandemic. And that's across the board, right? It's not just in housing, because it really did totally change, I think, in many ways, many dynamics of not just the state and our society, but also really helping us reevaluate government programs. And so I think to some extent, when you look at the report that I was just referencing that Brenda and Housing Works have put out, it shows that we've reached really almost right all over Rhode Island. But I don't think, I think we need to make sure, like I've already said, that certain communities have been disproportionately hit by COVID. And we need to make sure that in many ways that those are ones that we target and look for to help infuse these vital dollars into having an equitable recovery for all.
Thank you, Kim.
This is Brenda. I agree completely. I would point out a few other statistics that 26% of Latino households in the state live in overcrowded conditions, while they only make up 15% of the households statewide. We know that housing quality, age and condition of properties also have a big impact on the health outcomes of individuals. So I agree that with limited resources still, even though this, again, millions of dollars sounds like a lot to the average voter, I understand that, but these still are limited dollars. And so targeting those two communities most in need and individuals who are most in need are critical. We need housing across the board. We need to be upping our production of housing at all income levels, but let's try to develop and use other tools and other resources and work with local communities to look at underlying barriers like zoning and land use regulations that limit our ability to build and develop housing as well to increase the overall supply. But I personally want to target these resources to those most in need.
Excellent, thank you. And going off of that question, I see a question in the chat that might align with what we're talking about here. So what strategies can nonprofits, community development corporations, folks who are in those industries, what strategies can they use to establish this public, private, and nonprofit collaboration work to focus on projects like mixed use and mixed income developments?
Well, excuse me. We actually, in the Sankofa project, I think it's in some ways a perfect example of a lot of things we're talking about. One is we raised much more money outside of the state through equity and lending and grants than was available in the state. The other thing that I think that is good about public partnerships is that we were able to work with a private developer on that project, and we both brought to the table what we do best. And I think it was commendable that a for-profit developer could recognize and appreciate the value that the not-for-profit partner brought. And we each played to our strengths to get something done. Beside that is the community development piece. It was a project that we had information from the community, data that showed and demonstrated the need. We were able to then leverage and other dollars to combine housing at the same site with urban agriculture and trees and community gardens and a farm, and as well as a greenhouse and the incubator kitchen. So that brings those resources together. The for-profit partner brought his expertise, the not-for-profit brought theirs, and we worked well together.
Excellent, thank you.
I'd also point out that I think, thinking about Kim's comment about kind of looking at things through a COVID lens, I think it's also an opportunity for nonprofits and local towns and communities to kind of think differently and think about what different opportunities. We know that even before COVID, that retail space and commercial space market was changing rapidly. There are now a lot of empty buildings in many communities and other places. Are there a way to rethink those and repurpose those? Are there ways to kind of look differently and try to rebuild some of those retail strips and other things and add some housing above, or create some housing in those units? And so there's lots of great examples of that type of work in Rhode Island and across the country. I think it just kind of gets us, even as housing developers, we need to start to think differently about where we build as well.
I agree with that. We were doing rehab and readaptation of historic mills into affordable and mixed-use lots for apartments and for professional individuals. But then you have the arcade in Providence that was repurposed with some really unique housing styles. And so if those are not brownfields in the downtown evident areas or in the other cities and towns where they have these commercial buildings that may have space available, figuring out how to combine housing, it's great workforce housing opportunities within the cities and towns to have an adaptive reuse of their commercial buildings.
Thank you. All right. So I think if you're someone who is an advocate for affordable housing or you're working in affordable housing, you understand the intense need for this bond funding. But for those, again, who might not have that experience working in that type of, or being in that type of field, why should Rhode Islanders care? I mean, I think we made some pretty good points throughout this entire thing, but really, like, for someone who maybe isn't living in an affordable unit, why should they care?
I can start this off, Alicia, because I want to talk a little bit about the cost here. And I appreciate that my fellow panelists have, you, Alicia, have said, you know, can we afford this? Can we afford not to? And that's especially true when you look at homelessness. I mean, people should care about this. I mean, even if all you care about is the bottom line and fiscal responsibility, without increasing the supply of our housing in Rhode Island, more and more people every year are going to continue to experience homelessness. And homelessness is incredibly expensive for the state. Mm-hmm. It is 70% cheaper to house someone than for them to remain in the shelter system or for them to be homeless. In 2017, because I know that these numbers are assuredly much worse because of COVID, but in 2017, Rhode Island spent about $5.5 to $7.5 million just trying to house chronically homeless individuals. So folks who are experiencing homelessness for over a year continued period. By intervening with housing and other supportive services, which those two together are essential, but this conversation is about housing, the state could realize savings of up to $2 to $3 million every single year. It is expensive to live in poverty. It is expensive to experience homelessness, but it's also incredibly expensive for the state. This is money that we could be spending for other incredibly important things. Not to say it's important, but we could be doing better here. We could be implementing better policy and we would have more money to help more people. So if you care about the quality of your life improving, I mean, this is Rhode Island, right? Rising tide lifts all boats. So you got to have a boat in the water. But if you do have a boat in the water and you want your quality of life to improve and you want more of your taxes to go to things like education or job creation or green spaces or parks, etc., all of those things, then this is a policy that you should support. This is a bond package that you should support, and you should get out and vote on the second, because having an adequate supply of housing helps end and prevent homelessness, and it will also much cheaper in the long run. So.
Alicia, to follow up on the excellent points that Christina just made in terms of how to advocate for this bond, I think answering your question is really hard to do without briefly talking about the bond package as a whole, right? Because it's why all of Rhode Island should be caring about why do we need these bonds, right? And we need them to get Rhode Islanders back to work. We know that there's nothing more important than getting Rhode Islanders back to work, to building back stronger after this COVID crisis, to creating high-wage jobs. We know we need to build an inclusive recovery, like what Brenda was saying. We need our communities of color and low-income workers. We know that they're some of the hardest hit, and we know that this has revealed that COVID has revealed really that zip code determines health, and economic crisis has revealed, the degree to which folks have been left behind in our last economic crisis. And we know we need to double down on long-term investments, and that bonding is a smart and responsible way to create economic growth in a financial crisis. And so I think it would be remiss if we don't talk about that. There's also on the ballot $107 million to create higher education opportunities. There's $74 million for environmental and recreational projects. And that's not just beaches, that's clean drinking water and clean rivers, right? There's $71 million in transportation, $15 million in early childhood care, $7 million in arts, and $60 million in commerce infrastructure, which includes really important jobs at the Port of Davisville and the Quonset. So I think it's really hard to answer that question without talking, and I know this panel was just a focus on housing, but without taking a step back and looking at the broader picture of why we need this for all of Rhode Island.
Absolutely, Kim. And I just want to remind folks that you can find more information about all of those questions in the voter handbook, the voter information handbook, which is available on the Secretary of State website. And again, we have that under our website at southcountyhabitat.org/advocacy. There's a resource part of that page where that's posted as well. So I agree. I think, we're talking about housing today, but you got to look at the whole picture because it all is impacted by this upcoming election, March 2nd.
Can I just add too? I mean, no, I don't think that we need to remind us, but we're still in a public health emergency as well too. And it's never been more important that every Rhode Islander has a healthy and affordable home. As we all know, and I know I'm preaching to the choir looking at the attendee list, but it's impossible to shelter in place when you have no home. You can't practice social distancing when you live in overcrowded or unsafe housing. How do you participate in remote learning when you're at risk of eviction or foreclosure of your home? So, again, to Christina's point, that my guess is that every Rhode Islander knows somebody who's impacted by housing insecurity just based on the sheer numbers of people who are. But even if you are not, somebody within your circle, somebody at your church, somebody who helped you bag your groceries at the supermarket, somebody that supports you and keeps you healthy and safe in your life is housing insecure. And so for that reason, if that's not a good enough reason, I'm not sure that I can think of one. So vote yes on 3 and support the other bonds as well.
I completely agree. Looking at this from every aspect, I don't see a downside for our state by supporting the bond. When land is vacant and abandoned or a home is foreclosed, the drain on that neighborhood is real. Putting those back on the tax rolls or preventing them from dropping off is crucial. It increases the values of the surrounding properties, stabilizes neighborhoods, but it also in turn triggers other economic investment. Like I said before, we create primary jobs in construction, but there's secondary and tertiary jobs at local stores and the business that's increased at local stores. And we're a state of small businesses. So if I need to now buy new appliances, furniture, if I need to go to get some landscaping at a nursery, if I'm going to buy home repair products, those sales are all increased when people are investing and buying homes. Since Rhode Island doesn't have an income tax, real estate taxes are essential. We need to make sure our tax base is stable and increasing. We've all heard about companies and their inability to recruit workers to Rhode Island because of the lack of affordable housing. We can't afford to lose businesses because they can't afford to hire people because they can't afford to live here. I know for West Elmwood that almost every year we have 1 or 2 families that move out of our rentals to buy a home. Those units remain affordable to the next person or family. So preservation is just as important as production. Brenda talked about 37% of households being cost burdened. That means, as she said, that most Rhode Islanders, if not us personally, that we know someone, one of our children can't stay in the state because they can't get a job that pays what the housing cost demands. We have family members, a parent. We have friends and family that are living either unaffordably or substandard. Even if we don't know it and they don't talk about it, just understanding the sheer numbers and the impact that this has had and what's already been in place, this has to be a statewide effort. I'll give you this as an example to help describe me from my standpoint. I looked at the area median income for North Kingstown. For a family of 4, that family earns between $43,000 and $52,000 annually. At the higher end of that, that's $1,085 income a week or $31 an hour for a 35-week work week. Here's some job postings that I just looked up and found. At Aldi's Supermarket, a job posted at $14.30 an hour for an associate. A property inspector was needed in Middletown. The advertised salary was $16.50. and a human resource assistant was being sought for a credit union in Wakefield, and that salary was posted at $18.10 an hour. That's why we should all care. It's why we should vote yes on 3 next month. We're talking about the working poor here. They need this bond as much as the people in shelters and the people in rentals wanting to move into home ownership, those in domestic violence. Just the working poor, our children graduating from college, our young children getting married and starting a family need this bond.
Thank you, Sharon. That's so valuable too, because we know that, I think, Brenda, you would probably be able to put the number on it, but the median renter income is, if you look at it, it's under $15 an hour. And to affordably purchase a 2-bedroom market priced home in Rhode Island, you need to be making, I think, double that. Brenda, I think if that's correct.
Yep, you're pretty close. The median renter income is $34,255 to be exact, and there are no municipalities in the state where you can affordably rent and not be considered cost burden. There's only one municipality where the median household income of $63,296 where you can affordably buy, and that's currently in Central Falls. But inventory, even before COVID, was extremely low, and so good luck trying to find something. We're also seeing huge pressure again from outside Rhode Island of people coming in to buy properties, and that's been a consistent problem, but has been growing even more since COVID.
Yep, we've seen this increase in wages, but we're still seeing this increase in the cost of home, and it's just leaving so many Rhode Islanders out of reach. And so again, just my 2 cents of why I think this is important and why people should care. Is there any other comments anyone wants to add to that point?
Yeah, I do. Another thing to consider is, as this goes along, it's only going to get worse unless something changes. So, I mean, I really, really appreciated, Brenda and Sharon, how you articulated why this matters. And you talked about the personal, like, you spoke from the heart about how this affects people. But also, I mean, I encourage people to remember, you should support this, because think about the future that you're leaving for yourself, for your future, and the future that you're leaving for your loved ones. If you have kids, and you see this trajectory that Rhode Island is on, where wages, cost of living, cost of housing especially, continues to go out and out and out and out and out and out. You really want your kid to graduate from school with tens of thousands of student loan debt and not be able to find any place to live and end up experiencing homelessness? Experiencing homelessness is something that is far more common than people realize. I mean, Brenda, when you were talking about, encouraging people to think of the folks who are in their lives that are keeping them safe, that are keeping them healthy, that are helping them, assisting them, excuse me. I mean, the homelessness can hide. It's not just somebody with a shopping cart filled with bags. It's not just the B-roll that you see on the background of the Sinclair broadcasting story, right? And if we don't change something, we're going to see more and more people experiencing homelessness. Is that a legacy that we as a state want to perpetuate and want to leave? So making these kinds of investments, voting in support of these types of policies is critical. I mean, think of your community, but also you can think of yourself and think of your family and what are you leaving for them?
Yeah. Chris, Alicia, to follow up on what Christina just said, I think that's just so accurate. If you can personalize this for individual voters, I think that really makes a difference. And I'm struck by what Christina just said about what are we leaving behind? And as a mom of 2 young kids, and I have a 5-year-old who just started kindergarten this year, and in a very unique and odd time to be in kindergarten. And yesterday I took her to Crossroads, and she met Karen, who's the head of Karen Santelli, who's the head of Crossroads. And Karen was telling her a little bit about what they do there. And I was struck by what Karen said to her, which is like, her when I was asking what piece of advice you would have for a young kid, and trying to explain to a young kid how do we address homelessness and what are we leaving behind? And she said the number one thing is to be kind, right? And because you never know what someone's going through. And I'm struck by that in particular for our youth that are, doing all this distance learning this year, that you never know. Like a lot of kids are doing distance learning from shelters, from cars, from, like the chat was saying, couch surfing in other people's homes. And so I just think that's so vitally important to think about what are we leaving behind for that next generation. And, I don't want to belabor the point about the other bonds, but that's really why we also have to vote yes on 5, because we know that, along with having a place to work and a place to live, we also need a place for high quality and affordable childcare. And that's what yes on 5 will do. And it will increase those number of seats available so that we are lowering the cost for working families, and so that we can ensure that our childcare facilities have great facilities that we can actually send kids to. And so that no child is just attempting to do distance learning from a shelter or from a car.
I think it's really important that we did talk about the fact that, excuse me, we talked about the fact that sometimes we don't understand at homeless and it's hidden. But for those of us with young adult children who are trying to buy their first home, who are trying to get started in their career, if they're coming back home, they're homeless, because that was not the American plan. Our plan is that they become self-sufficient and move on. Or if we're losing our kids' closeness because they're moving out of state, then is that something we want? And it's not even about what we're leaving behind. It's about what we're doing now.
Thank you so much for all of that valuable input. I ditto to all of the above. Excellent. So if I was a listener on this call, I would want to roll my sleeves up, get involved, be a strong advocate, get things done. So if that is who I am on this call, how can I learn more about being a housing advocate and being present when these things are being talked about in my community, as well as, at the state level?
Well, you've got all these people right here on this call that are representing an agency. Reaching out to one of them, reaching out to the other groups that we've mentioned and some that haven't been, reaching out to the Housing Network of Rhode Island, the advocacy groups, and just saying, what can I do? How can I help? What are you doing? Where do I fit? Realizing that it's not just about whether I have money to donate. I could be a good writer. I could have experience in budgeting. I could be a professional accountant on my first job and moving up. But it's also about fire in the belly. Sometimes it's just about being present, helping to whatever that is, from stuffing envelopes to making calls to bringing your millennial skills and creating flyers to the CDCs that don't necessarily have budgets for marketing and PR. So it's the back end work, but it's also going home and talking to your friends and your family about the very issues and helping them to bring it home. It's not about those people who can't pull their feet up, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And as millennials are the group that seems to care the most of any generation I've seen, their willingness and ability to communicate these messages are key. So participating, sitting on board, supporting events, offering what you have to bring, and then taking the message back is really key.
I agree, and I'm so glad that Wendy's on the panel with us today, because I think it's so critical to kind of humanize the story. Put yourself in the story to remind folks that we're all in need. We're all part of the human race, and we all have a part to help and support each other as well too. And so folks like Wendy, who are willing to be an advocate and share her personal story, I think are critical and important. As Sharon said, you know, I mean, my housing colleagues know I'll talk about housing whether I'm invited to or not. And so, you know, don't be afraid to talk to people about it. Just, you know, mention it, talk to your neighbors and groups and say, hey, you know, just make sure wanted you to be aware about why this matters and why this is important as well too. And so it's a lot about just doing it. And then at the local level, being involved and engaged. I mean, as Sharon knows, we spend hours and years fighting battles at the local level to build and develop more affordable housing, mostly because people have very wrong misconceptions and misinformation about what this housing will do and who it's for. Exactly. And so trying to kind of help persuade your neighbors and make the case and talk to your neighbors about why more investment in housing makes sense is what we really need to focus on in order to get more units built.
Yeah, can I jump in there for a second? It's
Sure.
just call Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless and tell them you want the Speakers Bureau to come out. We'll take an hour of our time to speak with you, answer questions, so that you know what it's like to be homeless and to be a homeless advocate from the side of already being there.
Great.
Excellent. I do want to say, if you're ready to roll your sleeves up, there is a campaign because of this question 3. It's the Yes on 3 campaign, and they're working hard to put materials together so that we can use outlets like social media and our website to educate folks on what this question means and what it means for not only building homes, but for our jobs and for our state. So if you're someone who wants to voice your support on this, the Yes on 3 campaign is looking for letters to the editor. And so if you're interested in being a part of this campaign, you can go ahead to yeson3ri.org or email yeson3ri@gmail.com. I just put that link in the chat. So there is momentum behind this particular bond question, and we're urging for as much support as possible because it is important, as we've outlined today. Is there any other pieces of information that the panelists would like to put out here on the Housing Talks universe before we do our wrap up here?
Yes, I do. If you want, building off of everything that everyone has said, join Homes RI, get involved with Homes RI. What unites all of us here on this panel is that we are all at that table, but we need more folks there. Excuse me. Follow Homes RI on social media, get the emails, right? Stay engaged that way. And when you see the calls to action, leap into action. Okay? And not only Homes RI, but make sure you're following all of the organizations that are here today. Make sure you're following, you're staying engaged with, excuse me, with organizations who are doing this work on social media, email listservs, or just give them a call, right? Like, I mean, I get a lot of my information from social media, being a millennial, but this is how we have to stay engaged. I mean, it's not like we can give each other, we can see each other in person and we can like hand out flyers or put up posters or, you know, hold signs and honk and wave. This is how we stay connected. This is how we have to exchange information. So there's a lot that's being exchanged. We want you to get in it because we need you at this table. Many hands make light work, and we got some really, really heavy lifting to do.
Vote on 3 on March 2nd. That's key. Vote, share, and post, and tell everybody you know to vote on 3. And now you have a lot of information on why it's important. So we've given you some tools to help us with your tools.
And Alicia, I would, add that if you want to not physically go to the ballot, you need to get your mail ballot application in by February 9th, which is next week. So.
Excellent. That actually segues perfect into sort of our wrap up here. Any other comments before we wrap up? All right. Yes. Well, I do want to, again, thank all of our panelists this morning. You could have been anywhere and you chose Housing Talks with Habitat, and I cannot thank you more than for being here today. And again, thanking the University of Rhode Island Center for Career and Experiential Education for helping set this up and, taking the stress of the technology and being able to help us all. Again, thank you so much for your support. And just to remind everyone what Kim just said. The deadline to submit your mail ballot application is Tuesday, February 9th. It's coming up. So mark your calendars for that March 2nd election. You can vote in person early from February 10th to March 1st. So keep that in mind. And then March 2nd, the polls open for that special election. Again, all of this information you can find at the vote.sos.ri.gov website. And Christina, were you about to say something?
Yeah, I was going to add one thing to that, Alicia. Make sure, y'all, when you go to vote, if you're not voting by mail, to bring your ID. Rhode Island, unfortunately, is still a voter ID state. Hoping the General Assembly will take up legislation this session to make that racist, awful policy go away. But we still are a voter ID state, so make sure that you have an ID with you. On the Secretary of State's website, there's a list of all the different types of acceptable IDs. I always bring my driver's license with me, but there are other IDs you can use if you don't have a driver's license. And if you don't have an ID, a proper ID with which you can vote, the Secretary of State will send you one for free. And the link to that is on the SOS website. You can also just give them a call too, but don't forget your ID. The other piece of that is if you go to vote and they try to turn you away, okay, don't leave. You can still, I mean, if you get there at 11 and you forgot your ID and you have, you know, 3 more hours in the day in which you could go back and vote with ID in hand, okay. But if you can't go back, stay there, stay in line. There are voter protection hotlines that you can call. That information is going to be made more widely available. You could also call the Secretary of State in case there isn't, but I imagine there will be voter protection lines. But you can also request a provisional ballot. Do not leave without voting. Stay there, stay in line, cast your vote. Your voice matters, your vote matters.
I think if you want to be a strong advocate, the place to start is to cast that vote and vote yes on question 3. Absolutely. And I do want to remind our viewers who are on the call with us, you can learn more about South County Habitat's advocacy efforts. I think I've said it a few times, but southcountyhabitat.org/advocacy, beautiful webpage. I highly recommend you check it out. And again, if you want to get involved on the specific campaign for question 3, we urge you to go to yeson3ri.org or follow them on Facebook and Twitter at VoteYesOn3RI. So with that being said, I just want to again extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to our panelists, to the University of Rhode Island, and our attendees for sticking with us this morning and learning a little bit more about this specific bond issue. They all are equally important, so I highly suggest you do your research before you vote. But again, March 2nd, if it's not on your calendar, put it on right now. And with that being said, thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Alicia.
everyone. Take care.
See everyone.